Welcome to The Dog's Voice, the podcast where we talk about puppies, their health, and all things dog related. I'm your host, Ben the Vet. This podcast is brought to you by the Dog Breeding Reform Group, where we're working to improve the health and welfare of dogs and support responsible breeding and acquisition and informed dog care. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Dan O'Neill. Dan is a general practice vet and is Professor of Companion Animal Epidemiology at the Royal Veterinary College, whose Vet Compass research group focuses on understanding more about the health and welfare of the pets we love by looking at big population data, something that's not done a lot in the veterinary sphere. Dan is also part of the team that has created a new tool to help breed healthier dogs, which is called the Innate Health Assessment tool, which is a really valuable tool for both breeders and anybody looking for a puppy. And I'm sure we'll be talking lots about that. Dan, I know you're a really busy man. Thanks very much for joining us. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. It's wonderful to be here, Ben. I followed your work for years on social media where you're trying to help people understand truths and mistruths about the health of their dogs. So it's wonderful to be here chatting with you today.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of things kind of just really ingrained into dog culture that I think need to be challenged and talked about more. So that's what I aim to do in my social media content. I mean, this podcast, really, we're making it for anyone who wants to listen, but anyone who cares about dogs, but specifically, really, we're aiming it most directly at anyone who's thinking of getting a puppy at some point in the future, anyone in the world of dog breeding, sort of within that sphere. And now, well, people hear that you're a professor of veterinary science, and they might think, oh, well, how's that going to be relevant to puppies and dog breeding? Can you talk a bit more about the work that you do, Dan, and why you do it as well?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. And actually, a lot of this, Ben, goes back to the comment you just made earlier about misconceptions. So essentially, what I try to do is try to explore whether what we believe is actually what is true. And sadly, much of what we believe isn't true. And it turns out not to be true, and sometimes disastrously not true from the dog's perspective. Much of what we believe is what we grew up with, what we were told as children, or maybe it's what the mainstream media tells us, like newspapers, or what advertisers tell us as they're trying to sell their products, or what social media tells us. And a lot of this is, certainly when it comes to dogs, is based upon belief systems we had 50 or 100 years ago about the types of dogs we should own. But now it's starting to become clearer and clearer that much of it just isn't true. And sadly, even though we might want to believe something is true, that doesn't necessarily make it true. So that's essentially what I do. I try to generate evidence, and evidence is the thing that helps us know whether what we believe is true is true. And my background is I'm a first opinion vet. I was in general practice for over 20 years. And over that time, I just came to challenge much of what we accepted was true in the wider world and also in the veterinary world. Some of those were clinical questions, like if I was presented with a dog with uncomplicated diarrhea, should I use antibiotics or not? And certainly 10, 15, 20 years ago, most vets did use antibiotics because that was the belief system. But also during those years, I started to challenge myself about my beliefs about health and welfare related to dogs and their body shapes. And increasingly, I was seeing more and more dogs with extreme body shapes where the owners love these dogs and all owners love their dogs. The media seemed to be presenting these extreme dogs as being wonderful, but yet we knew there was a problem. There was health issues. And somehow what we believed, that these were wonderful dogs, didn't gel with what my eyes were telling me in a veterinary practice, i.e. that there was lots of sickness problems. So I started to wonder, how could a nation of dog lovers be so blind to the suffering? And I came to realize the difference was evidence, lack of evidence. It was the comment you made earlier. There just hasn't been a lot of population level research in veterinary practice. So I set out on a journey, and that journey has taken me 15 years so far. I left general practice to move into academia. I set up a project at the Royal Veterinary College called Vet Compass, where we collect data from millions of dogs, cats, indeed any animals that present at vet practices across the UK. And then we search those data to try to discover the truth, to try to discover the evidence and learn at a population level what are the risks associated with certain extreme body shapes. And for what it's worth, just because I did raise the question, diarrhea, we did do the study. And for the vast majority of dogs with uncomplicated diarrhea, there is no benefit from antibiotic therapy. So there's another myth busted for you, Ben.
I think that's one of those areas, isn't it, where it's just become sort of tradition and the done thing, and the evidence is not the plural of anecdote, isn't it? That's the sort of saying. I think I would sometimes use metronidazole. I have to say, I'm guilty of doing that when I was a new graduate, maybe. And sometimes you would feel like you see a response, but really, we need this big population data to prove, one way or the other. And it's not done a lot in veterinary. And what the Vet Compass group does is really is kind of research with those huge numbers of animals in the studies. Is that quite an internationally unique level of research?
Yeah, this is in essence the core of it. So specifically in relation to Vet Compass, it's right across the UK. We have about a quarter of all UK veterinary practices feeding in data, anonymized data. So these are the clinical records and the species and the breed and the insurance status and the drugs that are used. To date, we have over 30 million companion animals in the UK with their data fed into Vet Compass. But we are starting to roll that out worldwide. Vet Compass Australia started in 2016. Vet Compass Singapore is just rolling on. And we have a bunch of other countries. So the concept itself is starting to go international. And that's hugely valuable because the myths that are out there to be busted are just limitless.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? That this data, translates into benefiting animal welfare, and that's the drive. That's the need for this information, that it will have a positive impact, not just on animal welfare, but also on the environment, on so many different things. I think going back to dog breeds, like I remember being at vet school and talking about different disorders and different sets of lectures and learning that, German Shepherds get this particular type of skin disease or are prone to inflammatory bowel disease, or they get this very rare kind of congenital heart disease. And I think it's quite overwhelming. I guess I realized the more I knew, and when I was in practice, how widespread these predispositions to different health problems are in dog breeds. But I think part of the problem is that it's so overwhelming. A lot of people struggle to even name these several hundred dog breeds that are in existence, let alone being aware of all of the health problems that each breed suffers from. I think that's maybe part of the reason why like inherited health problems have become such an issue. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In 2018, I co-wrote a book with Alex Goff and Alison Thomas called Predispositions to Disease in Dogs and Cats. So that's an entire book listing each of the individual breeds and all their predispositions. Now, even the fact that we have a book that says that each breed can be recognized by its own predispositions, and the same happens in cat breeds, modern cat breeds as well, tells us a huge story. And this is one of these things you said earlier about tradition and the done thing. Unfortunately, what most of us tend to do is we live with tradition and the done thing, and we continue, for example, giving antibiotics to diarrhea cases because that's what our boss did before we joined the practice, or that's what vets did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And instead, we should probably be challenging all of these things. So if I'm able to write a book about breed predispositions in dogs and cats, surely the next question should be, why are there predispositions? How long has that gone on? And it has gone on for decades and decades, probably over a century for some of these breeds. And how can we stop it? Because ultimately, breed predispositions mean that those breeds, those individual breeds, are suffering because of the predisposition and therefore suffering because of their breed. And that's unacceptable. We all love dogs. Everybody who breeds owns, and even if you just like dogs in general without owning them, we want them to have a healthy life. So no breed should ever have a predisposition. That's the ultimate goal. And really, this comes back to whether when we own a dog, whether we're actually choosing to own a dog or we're choosing to own a breed. And really, we should all be choosing to own a dog where they all have baseline good physical genetic health. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. And that's what we're trying to do something about now.
And that's because really there's sort of two sort of sides to this, isn't there? There's the genetic problems that many dog breeds are prone to, and also problems that they get that are related to their appearance. Obviously we've got this huge variety in the way our dogs look, from a Great Dane that's 70 kilos to a tiny little 3 or 4 kilogram Chihuahua. When is it that a distinguishing feature or appearance characteristics of a breed, when does it become a problem?
That's a really good question. And that's the one that we're just about starting to grapple with now with the Innate Health Assessment, which we'll probably come on to. Almost some of this goes back to understanding the background. So dogs as a general group, as canines, evolved about 10 million years ago. So for about 10 million years, we have canines all over the world dingoes, foxes, wolves, coyotes. It doesn't matter where you go in the world and what sort of canine you look at. They're all basically the same. They have a long tail, they have a flexible spine, they have flat skin, they have eyes that sit in their sockets, they have teeth that interdigitate properly, they have a long nose that helps them to breathe and keep cool. That's the basic canine body shape. And that's the shape that 10 million years of evolution has evolved these dogs to have maximal survival, which means they have the best possible health and the best possible longevity. So that's the basic canine shape. And then about 10,000 years ago, so a drop in the ocean compared to 10 million, dogs were domesticated. And humans started to select. And we selected for dogs that maybe were better for what we needed them to be. But those dogs still had to work. So they were retrieving dogs or hunting dogs or guarding dogs or dogs to pull plows or whatever. And those dogs still had to work. So they still needed a good, basic, healthy body function and body shape. So there was no problem. And then something strange happened about 150 years ago. Humans became so wealthy in the Victorian years that we could have dogs that didn't need to have a working function anymore. They just had to be useful to us for our pleasure. So either showing them for our pleasure or as companion animals. And lots of dogs continued to have good body function. But unfortunately, part of that drive to show dogs and to have dogs for companions meant we started to push towards dogs with extreme body shapes that were no longer healthy. And then we invented breed. Breed didn't exist before that. Breed was something we needed to allow us to show dogs. We needed to categorize them. And each of the breeds needed to become more different to all the other breeds, more diverse in the overall body shapes, so that they could claim a space, become an individual, unique breed that we could recognize. And unfortunately, that brought this demand for increased extremeness of body shape. So breeds are a human invention. We keep changing them. And that's really what we need to accept, that breeds can keep changing. And just because 100 years ago, when we did not understand much about dog welfare, and it was a different world we lived in, and dogs had a different place in our hearts, just because it was acceptable then to have breeds with extreme body shape, it is no longer acceptable today. And that means legally acceptable, but also socially and welfare-wise, and even economically, because these extreme dogs have lots of health problems and they cost their owners a lot of money. So breeds are a human invention. They exist. It is wonderful for humans that we have lots of breeds. For most breeds, there is no issue from a health point of view. They have full 10 out of 10 innate health assessment scores, really physically healthy. So breed is a wonderful thing, and we should cherish breeds and try to get breeds to continue. But there are some of them that do need to change towards a better physical health shape. And that's really what we're talking about today, extreme body shape.
And I think that it's really important, I think, to remind people that breeds are man-made, and they are a very, dog breeds as we recognize them today are a very, very recent human invention. And going back to what you were saying about when dogs were initially domesticated for more working functions, there were different types of dog, weren't there? But I think they were not as extreme in their body shape, and a hunting dog didn't have a very clearly defined appearance like breeds that we recognize today. And actually, a lot of dog breeds, essentially, if you look at them, look almost like clones of each other. They're so similar.
So back before 150 years ago, before the invention of breed, this new concept, and dogs were types or strains or families, and often they were defined by their function. So a dog was a retriever. Now, it didn't matter whether that was a small dog, a big dog, a hairy dog, a not hairy dog. The look didn't really matter. It was the dog's function. It was a retriever if the dog was good at retrieving. It wasn't about the look, it was about the function. And basically what we've now flipped is the whole world now sees dogs based upon how they look, not based on their function. And unfortunately with breeds, when initial push towards inventing breeds came about, breeds were defined very precisely. Breed standards were drafted for them. And then humans started to assume that the closer we got to this breed standard, the better the dog was. And from a show point of view, that probably made some sense. But it did mean then that there was huge levels of inbreeding to get closer and closer and closer to this ideal version of the dog. And unfortunately, that now means we have lots of genetic issues with some of the modern breeds where there is very little genetic diversity within those breeds. And again, that's what the Innate Health Assessment, which we'll come on to later, can help with. Because as we're moving those breeds towards having better physical health. That means options for breeding like outcrossing, where we're mixing with different strains of the same breed or even some alternative breeds. And that will improve the genetic issues as well as the physical issues.
So when we're talking about the extreme appearance side of things, somebody that's looking to get a puppy and they're thinking about what sort of dog they want to get, what kind of physical features are the ones that we're talking about that are harmful?
If I'm an owner, what do I need to do? One of the things I've learned in epidemiology is if you don't define something, you can't measure it. And if we use terms that aren't defined, we can have lots of people all agreeing with each other, but actually all defining it differently in their own head. So one of the things I've started to do in this space is to define things that are important. And extreme conformation is an important term. So extreme conformation is defined as body shapes that don't exist in nature in dogs, man has selected for, but that also bring issues around the health and welfare of these dogs. So you had said earlier about dogs that were used for hunting or retrieving, right? Those dogs have to be able to take exercise. They have to be able to breathe. Part of breathing in dogs requires that you have a long enough nose that can cool air coming in, and that also allows air to move in and out freely. So in nature, we would never have dogs with flat faces. That just wouldn't happen because flat-faced dogs all have varying levels of degrees of obstruction of airflow in and out. So that reduces their ability to exercise, to sleep, to breathe. And that's one of the extreme conformations. And there are several of these. Basically, if you think about a dog's body, pretty well every part of a dog's body that humans can manage to select for different shapes, body shapes from, we've done it. So we've changed their noses, their tails, their spines, their skin, their colors, their eyes, whatever. Not all of those changes bring issues. Lots of them don't. Currently, the Royal Kennel Club in the UK recognises 225 different breeds. Within Vet Compass, and the Royal Kennel Club breeds are the pedigree breeds, a lot of them quite long-standing. Within Vet Compass, we collect data from vet practices, so every type of dog that comes in with a breed name is a breed. So within Vet Compass, there are over 1,200 different recognizable dog breeds. A lot of these are the new breeds that are just emerging, cockapoos and cavapoos and labradoodles. And these are breeds hugely popular, and these are new breeds that haven't yet entered the pedigree world. So essentially, when we're talking about extreme conformation and you're a new owner, you ideally should be looking to get a dog that has the capacity to live a full canine life. And that means having a body that has all the parts that allow the dog to live a full canine life. So that means eyes that sit in the dog's socket, not bulging out, that are prone to getting damaged. That means having a muzzle that allows the dog to breathe, not a flat face that inhibits breathing. That means having a spine that bends so a dog can turn around and lick its backside. That means having a tail that can wag. That means having flat skin so we don't have folds where you get moisture down in the crevices and you get infections and horrible pain, and so on. There are dozens of these extreme conformations. And ideally, anyone setting out to get a dog, the very first thing, ground zero for choosing what sort of dog you're going to get, is that that dog has got an innately healthy body shape, a body shape that allows the dog to have a good capacity for life.
It's so frustrating that we have to remind people that a dog should have a tail they can wag and should be able to breathe with ease. But I think these things that just become so normalized. And again, we go back to traditions and culture and just what has become normalized. Why do you think we certainly have seen in the last maybe decade a sort of shift towards, not away from, towards some of these extreme body shapes, particularly with the flat-faced breeds like the pugs and the French bulldogs becoming increasingly popular. And we have seen a slight reduction maybe in the last few years in the number of new puppies being born of those sorts of breeds and people getting them. But why do you think maybe been a shift to other dogs with extreme appearance, like the Dachshunds with their long back and their short limbs? Why do you think we're seeing this shift in the types of dogs people have been choosing to get towards those dogs of extreme body shapes?
It's a really good question, Ben. It's one that there's been huge amounts of research on, because if we don't understand the reason why people are choosing to have dogs that are physically unhealthy, then it's very hard to try and make any changes to that. Unfortunately, it's complex. And I suspect if you spoke to every person who owns a dog with an extreme body shape, they would all give you a slightly different explanation as to why they chose that dog. A lot of it is because those dogs with extreme conformation have been around for so long. They've been around for most of our lives, which feels like a long time, But in the space of, when I'm talking about 10 million years of evolution, it's not. It's a millisecond. But in our lives, they've always been around. There's been pugs and bulldogs and all these different breeds that many of the dogs suffer from extreme conformation. And sadly, we haven't been exposed to the versions of those dogs that don't have extreme conformation. So there is some wonderful work, certainly in bulldogs. If you look at some of the newer types of bulldogs coming through, they're actually very moderate and it's wonderful. And we should be celebrating those dogs. The world is normalized to the extreme versions. Part of that is social media. Social media likes extremes. Something that's normal and typical and moderate isn't very good for getting clickbait attention and isn't very good for getting people to pause and look. General media as well likes sensationalist stories. That's why we get so much misinformation as well in the general media. The other thing is that until certainly Vet Compass and some other research programs like that, there hasn't been strong evidence to show the suffering of these dogs related to their conformation. Evidence is now coming to the fore. And also we have our intrinsic human empathy thing where we almost start to feel sorry for these dogs. Some people will say they own the dogs because they feel sorry for them, which is totally understandable from that individual dog's point of view. But each time that we get a dog, we're part of a system that's promoting production of more of those dogs. And we put a picture of our dog on social media, if it's got an extreme conformation, and we put positive messaging about that extreme conformation, we're part of the wider messaging, the machine that's promoting more and more extreme conformation. So it's really complex. It's a lack of evidence. It's years and years and years of normalization. And it's probably also, until recently anyway, it's probably also a silence from those groups who should be speaking up to protect dogs, because it was very hard to speak out in the face of a century of normalization by different organizations. But the organizations now are starting to speak out. And I think we are starting to see a shift.
And I think that's certainly having that data there that your research group and all around the world research that's being collated on this, I think really is enabling people to speak out and talk about this more with conviction and evidence. Certainly one of the reasons I got into making social media content was that I was growing frustrated at seeing these dogs come in as puppies and knowing that they'd be coming back to see me again and again with their various health problems that were, predictable from the start because they had a flat face, because they were a breed with XYZ problem that we know are very common because of genetic issues. So I think having that research there to say, look, we know this is a problem. We can't escape this or deny or talk around it anymore. We need to really confront it. Some people clearly love some of these breeds that do have extreme conformation, like the Dachshunds, like the French Bulldogs. They are extremely popular and people clearly love these dogs very much, as much as maybe they might be in some level of denial about their health problems. How can we balance this desire that people have to have a certain breed of dog that they like and the well-being of that animal?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because that's actually when you get to the hub of it. People talk about human behavior change. How do we change people's behavior so that actually the dog and the dog's welfare become a key criterion rather than just what we want as a human? And it's kind of interesting when you said about denial by certain people of the issues of extreme conformation. We've done a lot of research at the Royal Veterinary College. Rowena Packer leads a lot of work on this. And certainly owners of dogs with extreme conformation, and even not only owners, people who just love the look of those dogs, many of them will deny, but actually the majority are fully aware of the health and welfare issues and accept those, but they accept it as being normal for that breed, which is a huge issue for us when we say it is normal for a breed to have a very short life. So, for example, French Bulldogs in Vet Compass work have a life expectancy from the first year of life of 4.5 years. Pugs and English Bulldogs are in the 7 years. A typical dog overall in the UK from that study was 11.2 years. So these dogs are losing a third of their lifespan because of their extreme conformation, and owners are aware of this. So often it's not denial, but it's aware of it and it's accepting of it. And it's almost owners saying, I'm okay with this because I so much love this look of dog. And really what we need to do is flip that, where owners start to look at the world from the dog's point of view and ask the question, well, you as an owner might be okay with it, but do you think the dog is okay with it? This dog is the one that's going to suffer for most of its life with breathing problems or mobility problems, or not having a tail to wag, or having eyes that are ulcerated because they're bulging, or having skin that's painful because the skin folds are infected, leading to a shortened life. That's really where we try to flip it. The psychologists will talk about empathy, and they'll say there's 3 forms. There's cognitive empathy, where cognitively, from a knowledge point of view, we can know there are these health issues. And most owners know this. Anyone who buys a dog with extreme conformation and insures it will be aware that the insurance might well be double or even more for an extreme conformation dog compared to a typical dog. So I just went on to Churchill Insurance just because they promote themselves with English Bulldogs. And an English Bulldog is twice the cost to insure compared to a Labrador. So this is cognitive. We know these issues are there. Then there's emotional empathy where we get all stressy over it, but that doesn't really help us very much. And then the third part of empathy is compassionate. And it's where we actually stop thinking about the world from our point of view and we become the dog. And once you get there, people then start to think, maybe I shouldn't be buying a dog with extreme conformation. And unfortunately, most people only get to compassionate empathy once they've owned a dog. It's called experiential learning. I need to go out and buy this dog with extreme conformation and then suffer myself because I have to take care of this dog, cleaning its skin, cleaning its backside because it can't turn around and lick its bum, cleaning its eyes, and helping the dog to breathe and not taking it out on a hot day because it hasn't got a muzzle and it can't breathe properly, etc. But also from the dog's point of view, witnessing the dog suffering because of this extreme conformation. Unfortunately, most people don't get to that compassionate empathy point until after owning a dog and living it. It's almost like with a child who sees a flame as something beautiful and cute, and you tell a child not to put their finger in it. Unfortunately, most children need to stick their finger in the flame to understand the message. Something that's cute isn't always something that's nice. And everybody who owns these dogs loves them. And the sad thing is, most of them have a wonderful personality, but wouldn't it be lovely if we could have that same dog in a body that allowed the dog to live a happy life? So now we can be proud of owning the dog, and also the dog can be happy to live in that body and be of that breed.
Well, I think that neatly leads us on to talking about the Innate Health Assessment tool, which is something that you've been developing with others. Tell us more about that. I guess the idea generally in a nutshell is that we can breed healthier dogs and retain some of those characteristics in terms of their personality that people love about them, but have them born into bodies that don't cause them pain or cause them to suffer.
Exactly. This is it. It's as we said earlier, why does somebody get the dog they do? And it's really complex and it's different for every individual. The Innate Health Assessment, the IHA, actually is the most fabulous idea and most fabulous tool in the sense that it allows a win-win-win on all of these different criteria, both for the health of the dogs and the enjoyment of the owners from owning those dogs. Historically, and this is where this thing has come from, when I left veterinary practice, the idea of getting a healthy dog was that we did clinical health tests on a dog. So we got that dog and we did some genetic health tests, or maybe we radiographed its hips and measured its hips or its elbows. And more recently, there is this really good, actually, respiratory function grading system that Jane Ladlow has developed in Cambridge. The respiratory function grading system grades dogs on whether they have severe BOAS, this breathing problem that a lot of dogs with flat faces, such as French bulldogs, pugs, English bulldogs, suffer from. And the idea was that we would health test these dogs, and if they had disease, clinical disease, they were unhealthy. If they didn't have clinical disease, they were healthy. And we've been doing this. The hip dysplasia scheme has been around for 50 years. We've been doing this for over half a century, and we still have all these problems. So me with my evidence-based head on says, if we're doing something for 50 years, and a typical generation of a dog is 4 years, so the typical age of birth of the next set of puppies is 4 years, that means we've had 10, 12, 11 generations of dogs since, and we're still having problems. Therefore, even though the health tests may be working and are helping, they're not solving the problem. And that's what I did when I left veterinary practice and moved to the Royal Veterinary College to set up Vet Compass. I started to look at why those health tests weren't working. And the reason they're not working when it comes to extreme conformation is that it's not changing the extreme conformation. So we can have 10 French bulldogs, all that are extreme. We health test them. Half of them have BOAS, half of them don't. We breed off the ones that don't have BOAS. The next generation is going to look just like the previous one. And he's still going to have 50% BOAS in all likelihood, because we're not changing the actual root cause of the problem, which is the extreme conformation. So that's where the Innate Health Assessment evolved from. As part of the new wave of understanding health in dogs, I invented a new concept called innate health. And I started working on this about 10 years ago. And innate health is defined as dogs having the genetic and physical capacity to live a full normal life for that species. So that means being able to blink, breathe, give birth, eat, wag a tail, exercise, sleep, all the things that a dog should be able to do. And if a dog hasn't got the capacity to do that, then it hasn't got a good innate health. And that's what extreme conformation does. Extreme conformation prevents a dog from having the capacity to do something that that dog naturally should do. If we have variations of conformation or variations of breeds where the dog still has a full capacity, then that's absolutely fine. And we have lots of breeds. Most of our breeds have perfectly good innate health. So we look at Labrador retrievers and Cocker Spaniels and miniature Schnauzers and Greyhounds and Whippets, etc. All of them absolutely fine. But unfortunately, we have this subset of breeds that are struggling. So the innate health system is the list of extreme conformations. Now, to help the public, we did a series of pilot trials with Dogs Trust and with Battersea. We worked with APGO, a parliamentary group on animal welfare, and we've developed this specific application called the Innate Health Assessment. And any of your listeners can go to the internet, Innate Health Assessment. It's totally free and you can just use it. It's a set of 10 of the very common extreme conformations where we have trialed and tested to show that the general public, breeders, indeed anyone, school children, can assess dogs to say whether they have good innate health or not. So it's very, very simple. It's very quick to use. It might take you 20, 30 seconds to score a Labrador Retriever. It might take you a minute and a half to score a French Bulldog, a little bit longer because some of the characteristics are likely to fail. So it's really fast. It's really easy. But the key thing is in the process of using the Innate Health Assessment tool, you will start to learn what is acceptable legally, socially, morally, financially, welfare-wise in dogs from a conformation point of view, and what is not acceptable. It is not acceptable for dogs to have deep skin folds or not have a tail or not have a nose to breathe through. So it's both an educational tool at a more general level, but also it's helping people to understand about maybe the dog they're just about to breed or the dog they're just about to acquire, whether that's a good decision or not from the dog's point of view.
And I think the good thing about this tool is that it doesn't require any professional input. It's designed to be as simple as possible. And I guess that's maybe part of the reason why traditional health testing is not enough, or certainly not practical to use for every breeder. And obviously it's very targeted just on very specific problems, like hip dysplasia or like the breathing problems that the pugs get, but doesn't necessarily look at all the other kind of issues that those breeds get. Is this innate health assessment tool, I guess this can be used in conjunction, can't it, with traditional health testing as well?
And this is the idea. I've used the word complex a couple of times already. So understanding the health of animals is complex. So the innate health assessment is ground zero, right? So that's the very first thing we should do. No dog should be health tested, put through any health tests until it's got good innate health, because the dog already has got a problem. So the very first thing anyone thinking about getting a dog or breeding a dog should do is do an innate health assessment. If the dog passes the innate health assessment, then it's worth going on and doing all the health tests. And so basically, these are complementary. They add to each other. And the idea is that because the innate health assessment is 100% free, very easy to do, it can be done on every single dog. It avoids some of the issues that have come up with health testing where sometimes they're expensive. Sometimes you have to wait till the dogs are quite old before you can do the tests because we're waiting for the dogs to develop disease. And also, we might health test a dog. It might pass, but then a year later, it might develop the disease. So there's always these issues with health tests. Health tests are great. We should be doing them, but we should only be doing them on dogs that have passed the innate health assessment.
Yeah, I guess that's it. We'll make sure that the raw materials are, of the dog are innately healthy, that you can't change what is innately healthy or unhealthy. But so why, I know this tool has proved controversial in some circles. And I guess a lot of that kind of comes from all of this, like I said, it was all attached with tradition and what is the done thing. And so much is been culturally normal for a long time in terms of dog breeding, and this is challenging that. And I guess that's maybe where the controversy comes from.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the controversial thing. They often say that if you do something that's aimed to make a change, and if it doesn't cause some controversy, then it's probably not going to make any change. Humans don't like change. This is just basic human fact. And the majority of humans want things to continue the way they are because we're comfortable in that world and we have developed systems around that world. So systems of breeding or showing or selling dogs. Maybe some of our personal belief systems about ourselves are tied up with what we've been doing for many years. And I said earlier that even for me as a vet, one of the reasons I left veterinary practice to move to academia was because I was challenging myself. The stuff I was doing in practice, I didn't think was right. Even though it was what was the done thing or tradition, I didn't think it was right. So the innate health and evidence is challenging conventional beliefs. And for sure, there is a small proportion of people who aren't happy with that, who would prefer it to stay, the world to stay the way it was. I have to say the vast majority of breeders welcome it. It's wonderful for them. The majority of dogs would score 10 out of 10. Like they will pass the innate health assessment hands down, paws down even. So the majority of breeders are really happy. What tends to happen with the media, though, is that the media, if people are happy and content, the media doesn't share those messages because they're not clickbait, rage-baity messages. So if you have even a very small segment of any group and they have a very sensationalist story, that's what the media will pick up. You get times of the year when the media really wants certain types of stories. So for dogs, this is Crufts time. It's always the middle of March for a couple of weeks before Crufts and a couple of weeks after Crufts. The media just goes mad for any stories about dogs. And this year, unfortunately, the media picked up and shared a misinformation story about the innate health assessment being linked with 67 breeds being banned. Right. It's a wonderful headline. And some of it extended on to the corgi and the queen. And it's amazing how these stories spread. That's complete misinformation. It came from a source that wasn't fact-checked. So it was the Times initially did it. They didn't fact-check with the innate health assessment. The innate health assessment is there to support all breeds to have a sustainable future. There certainly were discussions, and there are across Europe, about breeds being banned. In the UK, the innate health assessment is aimed to stop breed bans. Breed bans are very difficult to enforce. We've seen them with the previous breed bans. The innate health assessment is there to improve dog welfare, to move all of the breeds towards having good innate health, and to prevent breed bans. So a lot of this misinformation was a little bit naughty by the journalists, but unfortunately, once it's out there, it keeps getting spread because it's wonderful rage bait. It will cause people to stop on the page, to get their dander up, maybe to write some comments if it's online. And this is all great for selling advertising around those media stories, but completely wrong. So the vast majority of breeders support the IHA completely. They see why it's needed. They understand the issues with their breeds. They want to breed healthy dogs. I don't think there is anyone out there who's setting out to breed unhealthy dogs who actually loves their dogs. And the innate health assessment supports them in that.
Really, it is only a very small number of breeds that would potentially fail the tool. And a lot of these breeds are the brachycephalics, the flat-faced breeds. If I'm a breeder of bulldogs or pugs, how can I go about breeding a dog of these breeds in order that they can pass the tool?
That's a really good question. And in fact, it goes back to some of the understanding of what we're talking about as well. And quite rightly, it's how people talk. They will say what you've said there, Ben, is that some breeds will fail, right? So the IHA doesn't test a breed, it tests a dog. Right. And remember my comment earlier is that if I could have a single wish, it would be that everybody would see their dog as a dog. But unfortunately, we don't. We see it as a breed. And that's a problem because if we have a conception of a breed, certainly when it comes to the extreme ones, as being, it must be extreme, that's a real problem. So basically, the IHA doesn't test breeds, it tests dogs. But there are some breeds where a high proportion of the dogs within that breed may fail. And that's wonderful in a way because we know there are issues. If every single dog of every single breed passed, then the IHA wouldn't be doing much of a good job of discriminating between dogs with issues and not issues, because we know there are lots of dogs out there with extreme conformation. So the IHA has to pick these up and detect them, and it does a wonderful job of doing that. For the dogs where a high proportion of the dogs within that breed fail, then that is telling us, so society, the kennel club, the veterinary profession, owners, breeders, it's telling us there are real issues with this breed, and it's telling us that that breed must be changed changed to move the breed, all of the dogs within that breed, towards less extreme body shape, less extreme conformation. And that's what the IHA does. Currently, there are 10 criteria within the IHA. We've set a very liberal, a very generous pass mark to begin with. So that's 8, that you need to pass 8 out of 10. So that still means that people can still technically say that a dog that has failed 1 or 2 criteria has passed. Ideally, every dog would have 10 out of 10. And for the majority of breeds, every dog will get 10 out of 10. So the IHA is there to help by detecting issues. And then that helps all of us to know what are the issues and which are the ones we must move away from.
I think really over time, I suppose part of the problem is breed standard, that the breed standards do encourage quite a lot of exaggeration. And when we talk of anyone listening who doesn't know what a breed standard is, it's the set of criteria that kennel clubs set out as to how a breed should appear. I suppose we have seen over time moving towards these breed standards, encouraging less and less exaggeration. So I suppose we're kind of just on a trajectory where hopefully the breed standards will allow for less and less exaggeration, as I say, because that's key really for breeding dogs that are compatible with the innate health assessment.
Exactly. Breed standards, as said earlier, it's complex. The whole thing is there's so many factors feeding in, and breed standards certainly are one of the areas that we need to work on. And most of the breed standards now are very vague, and it's our human interpretation of them. And certainly the breed standards, they really only have one purpose, and that is for dog showing. It's trying to set out what is the target we want the dogs to look like, and then the judges are meant to judge against that breed standard. Outside of that, they don't really have a lot of importance. The reality is that when we look at dog shows, we see different dogs winning on subsequent weeks. So actually, humans carry their own breed standard in their head, and it depends which judge is judging them. And the vast majority, I would imagine, if I got 100 people walking down the street here, I'd be very surprised if even 1 out of the 100 had ever looked at a breed standard. So they're there in the background, but very few people read them. It's really the breed standard we have in our head that's the problem. And that's the one that's put in there by social media, by advertising. So say, for example, I've set up a group, an international group, along with 3 others called the International Collaborative for Extreme Conformation. We now have 15 different countries around the world involved and more growing. And within that, 2 years ago, we launched some guidelines for advertisers that said that no advertiser should ever use an image of a dog with extreme conformation. And right across the world, there's been huge conformity to that. Lots and lots and lots of big companies have moved away from using extreme conformation in advertising. You said earlier, how do we change people's hearts and minds? That's part of it. It's trying to get rid of these images of extreme versions of these breeds from our media or social media, so that the image of the breed in our head changes. It is so complex.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's changing the breed standard that people have in their head. So just shifting this idea, this fixed idea that we have about what certain dogs should look like, because we know it causes harm. What would your final words of advice be for anyone listening, particularly anyone who wants to get a puppy and to be sure that that puppy is going to be healthy? I guess really we want to direct them to the innate health assessment tool, don't we?
This is actually the most important question of everything for your listeners, isn't it? If you're thinking of getting a puppy, how do you get a healthy puppy? So the first thing is dogs bring so much joy to our lives. So the first thing is, provided you can provide for that dog in terms of companionship, a nice environment, and being prepared for any health costs, bringing a dog into your life is the most wonderful thing. Absolutely wonderful. The second thing, though, is that we need to think about when we're getting a dog, what are our main drivers? Are we, when it comes to choosing what type of dog, are we being driven by what we would like, what we've been sold, this kind of meme from social media and advertising as to what is cute? Or are we being driven by actually what sort of life the dog is going to live? And unfortunately, until the IHA and until the last couple of years, with a lot of messaging about extreme conformation, we have so many people that have been driven to choose the type of dog they choose based upon cute, which probably must be one of the most horrendous words for dog welfare that ever existed, because cute generally means extreme for a lot of people. So very flat faces, folded skin, odd ways of walking, different behaviors, not having a tail. These are all deemed as cute by a lot of people. And unfortunately, now we're having to reframe cute. And certainly those criteria, that sort of cute, we need to reframe as suffering. All of those criteria are extreme and they all cause suffering. So the first thing anyone should do when they're thinking about what type of dog to get is think about the dog's innate health. Does that dog have a body that allows the dog the capacity to live a full canine life. So in other words, does it have a nose? Does it have eyes that sit in its skull? Does it have eyelids that blink fully? Does it have flat skin? Does it have a back that can bend? Does it have a tail? All these criteria, the basic components of a dog. Once you've decided that the type of dog that you're going to get has all of those criteria, you then start to look at the next layers. So you might choose based upon the size of your dog or your dog's typical behavior and the amount of exercise that you're able to give. But the basic criteria is innate health. To do that, you go to the Innate Health Assessment online. It will take you a minute to do. Tap in the answers to the questions for your dog and it will give you a result. Ideally, you're aiming at 10 out of 10 so that your dog has got the maximum innate health. It doesn't guarantee your dog will be healthy. All of us, certainly as we age, get health problems. You can't see me, but I'm sitting here wearing glasses. It's not a guarantee of health. Aging brings problems with it. But what it is doing is it's at least starting out with the capacity for good health. And then the rest of it, sometimes life brings accidents and unpredictable things.
I think that's it, isn't it? We need to encourage people to think about not just what dog is going to suit them and their lifestyle and how much time they have to walk the dog, but also put themselves in the dog's shoes. Can that dog live a happy, comfortable, healthy life and be a good companion? And being an innately healthy is really critical for that. So thanks so much for joining us, Dan, and thank you for everything you're doing with the Innate Health Assessment Scheme. Hopefully 10 years time, 20 years time, this conversation will be a very, very different one. So let's hope we can sort of move forwards for the health and the welfare of our dog population.
To add to that, Ben, I think it's a wonderful thing that you're saying, looking forward to 10 years' time. I imagine a world we look forward to 10 years' time where people at that time, so it's us in 10 years' time or the new generation of children coming through, will read about extreme conformation and they will see pictures of it and they will wonder why on earth those previous people ever thought that those conformations were cute in any way or acceptable in any way. In other words, we will have moved to a new zeitgeist, a new way of thinking about dogs, where the first criterion is that the dog is physically healthy. It's got a physically healthy body. And they'll be shocked that prior people ever thought that it was ever acceptable to have dogs with extreme conformation. And I think we're getting there. And the reason I think that is because I know people love dogs. And unfortunately, that version of love that we currently have, that's love of cute, so in other words, love of the box the dog lives in, I think is now moving to actually love of the dog, which is what the dog is, the personality, the being of the dog, and not just the box that it comes in. I know the world will be better for dogs, and I know that because people intrinsically love dogs. And once they start to understand that love requires actually a dog being innately healthy, people will change and change in their droves. And it's a lot of this change is down to people like you, Ben, with the work you do on social media and also with this podcast. So thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting discussion. I thank you to the listeners for joining us on The Dog's Voice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to us on your podcast platform, share it with other people who care about dogs, anyone who's thinking about getting a puppy, anyone in the world of breeding dogs, anyone who cares about dogs at all. You can learn more about our work at the Dog Breeding Reform Group and follow us on social media for more tips on finding a healthy puppy. And for future episodes, we've got a page on Instagram. Until next time, thanks for listening and for helping to give dogs a voice.